In the last about 3 to 4 days, we've been organizing a state burial for our late President J.E.A. Mills. This morning, we would assess how well we have gone about that exercise. It all ended yesterday. We will talk about events following from his death. I'm sure you've heard the minority talking about its regrets of a missed opportunity to reconcile with him. Are we guilty as a nation of excessively vilifying him? We will talk about questions that came up about the cost of the funeral rites. We'll talk about how to sustain the atmosphere of unity, as some have put it, that seems to be all over the nation. That's item number 1 on our table this morning. Also this morning, we will do some examination of how we went about the vetting and endorsement of the then Vice Presidential nominee and now His Excellency Mr. Arthur, Vice President of the Republic of Ghana. What has it added to our democratic credentials as a country? And finally, the President, John Dramani Mahama, can now focus on delivering the Better Ghana agenda for the next 5 months. But what are the major items that you would expect him to tackle? And indeed, can he do anything significant in the next 5 months? I want to start with our very first conversation, but let me introduce my guest to you. Godwin Adagwene is a lawyer and a lecturer at the Institute of Professional Studies, joining us for the first time on Newsfile this morning. Godwin, good morning, and thank you for joining us on Newsfile. Mr. Rashid Pelpo is a Deputy Majority Leader and Member of Parliament for Wa Central. Chief, thank you for being with us this morning. Sekun Nkrumah is a former, and I struggle to introduce you, a former head of the National Youth Authority, right. A former sympathizer of the NDC, now a sympathizer of the NPP.
I was a member of the NDC.
You were a member, but now you're only a sympathizer of the MPP for the 2012 elections.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
But more than a sympathizer, an active, involved actively in the campaign.
Why don't you just become a member?
No, I think I have my reservations there.
Okay, I hear you. I'm sure sometime we'll talk about that. And Abdul Malik Kubako is a managing editor of the New Crusading Guide newspaper. Chief, thank you for being with us this morning. Let's start off with what we tried to do as a nation over the last 3.5 to 4 days or so, trying to give our late President J.E.A. Mills a befitting burial. Gordon, as you watched the events unfold on television and as you listened to the commentary and the words of commiseration from leaders from all over the world, you think we succeeded in giving him a befitting burial?
Well, in terms of the burial, generally speaking, I think that yes. I mean, we did the best that we could in the circumstances, particularly having regard to the unity that cut across the political parties, the unity that cut across ethnic backgrounds, and the whole country was united on that particular issue. I think that that was the most we could do for him. Again, especially because that at least was what he stood for and worked tirelessly to achieve. So if in the course of his lifetime he felt that the society was not that united, and at death we at least gave him what he wanted, I think that we should be very happy that at the very least we have done what we ought to have done in the circumstances. Mm. But it also presents very useful lessons for us, and particularly for the political parties as entities, for politicians as individuals, and for the rest of us as citizens. You know, if you listen to the words of commendation and the commentaries that we gratuitously poured out, you would find a picture of contradiction, if you want to say. Because, I mean, the picture that we had when the man was alive was that he was a divisive figure, even within his own political party. We were presented with a picture of a weak leader, and to the very extreme, some portrayed him, and it was gradually becoming, concretizing our mentality that he was a hypocrite. I mean, those were the pictures that we were presented with. Now, if we believed that these were his true attributes, and then on death, immediately, we then showered on him attributes just the opposite of what we claim he stood for. then you have a situation of contradiction. But in that, we could also find, some value in it. Perhaps we did not appreciate the values that he stood for. Or maybe perhaps he didn't also do much to get us to see and to appreciate what he stood for. But at least for now, we know that there were certain things he stood for which the society cannot do without. Never again should we allow such important values to come under such extreme attack as we saw during his lifetime. It is not as if you have to be partisan. But take, for example, the culture of insulting personalities. I think that it is not something that we should encourage in our political discourse. The presidency almost came under severe attack daily from persons who ought to have at least shown some moderation. The whole society looked on. In fact, in some cases, we facilitated it because we provided a platform, we maintained the platform, we allow such attacks to go on. We could have done better than we did. So, as I said, it's a moment of reflection. Perhaps it was a divine intervention that he should die in such a dramatic fashion so that we can come to our consciousness as to what we should be looking for in a leader.
I've heard some persons argue that what you heard during those 2 weeks after his passing, as people eulogized him, were comments about Mills the man and Mills the values that he often spoke about.
Yeah.
It didn't necessarily mean that even his critics have changed their mind about what they thought of him as president and how he handled some of the major defining challenges and opportunities that came his way. Some have also suggested that, well, it's because culturally as Ghanaians, we don't speak ill of the dead. So even when people may harbor such sentiments, they are not quick to voice them out, especially when the man is fallen. Don't you think that's what happened here?
Well, let me take the last one first. If we say that we don't speak ill of the dead, it does not mean that we fabricate facts about the dead. What it means is that we emphasize the good things that the person did while alive and not the negative ones. So if that interpretation of mine is right, which I believe it is, we were right because the things that we said about him were personal testimonies from people who worked with him at various levels, people who went to school with him, people who played games with him, people who interacted with him. So these impressions that they were creating about him were impressions they formed from their personal interactions and contact with him. So those were facts. And I think that they were true about the man's life. Now, to the first point, I think it's legitimate. You can separate the person from his government because the government is not made up of him alone. It is made up of a number of individuals and groups. His ability to organize the group, his ability to influence the group with whatever values that he had as a leader can be a legitimate point of criticism. But even as we do that, I think that we can still separate the issue of attacking the person from the issue of his style of leadership. I will agree that much of the criticism had to do with his style. But again, you also have to understand that it was a competition between him and other people, even within his party. So the criticism of his style of administration had to be taken, not legitimately though, to a certain level so as to weaken him and to overtake him in a competition. Take the point of presenting him as a hypocrite. Here was a man presented as a peaceful person, and nobody doubted that. But he had people around him who sometimes spoke for him and spoke on his behalf. At least from my personal observation, some of them did not speak in a manner that reflected the person's personality. And others might have been tempted to say, if you are such a person and the people around you do things that do not reflect your personality, at least we should want to see public reprimand or something of the sort. That they didn't see, and therefore form a basis to conclude that he did not really did what he stood for. That is not to say that he might not have chastised them in private, but at least the critics didn't see that. What they saw was a free flow of these acts that did not, as it were, reflect the president's personality. So, to that extent, you may be a bit charitable with his critics. But again, it was too extreme, to the point that you will have young persons that will freely enter a studio and then call the president names, hypocrite, a gay, and those sorts, all sorts of things. And nobody could publicly call them to order. I think that we took the criticism to a very lawless extent. So, but again, the responsibility lay on persons like your good self as moderators of programs where these things are done. You should draw our attention to the fact that, look, you can criticize the person's acts, but you cannot take it to a certain extent. And I would want to say, if you permit me, that some of the moderators did not discharge that responsibility well. So you allow the people who were so much excited and then have been motivated by youthful exuberance, the excitement of having access to the media and then all of that, to see all kinds of things. So we can't keep talking about it all the time, but we can draw very useful lessons from
out of it.
Yeah.
Rashid, what do you think?
Well, by and large, Godwin has done some justice to the issues. You know, the analysis are from two angles. The angle of the presidency when he was alive, and the angle of the public viewing what he was doing in his lifetime. But generally, I think the burial was a very successful one. The commendations, commiserations coming from all over the world demonstrated very strongly that this was a personality who had a lot of influence in the minds and thinking of many, many Ghanaians. And that we have reason to say what we are saying today, to shower the praises and to reflect on the good things he did, and to pick on those good things and build on them so they become part and parcel of our lives. Peace is a very fundamental reason for a successful democracy. And peace is one thing that nobody can ignore when you want to develop an economy. So if we have somebody who was crowned the king of peace, we should find out exactly what was inside him that made him to be what he was. So it's important that we begin to draw good lessons from this character. We begin to understand ourselves, how we couldn't ride on the boat with him, and why we should now begin to shape our thinking to benefit from the totality of his life. I believe that Professor Mills has brought us something that we need to begin to formalize into our political discourse now. This was a man who was vilified most of the time, attacked from inside and outside, and unfairly denigrated, and he said nothing. You know, I have had very good personal relations with him. At one point, I once entered his office. He said, look, I could take my bag and leave this office, but I know that it will go against, contrary to the spirits that, with which I was elected by the many Ghanaians who thought I should do this job for them. And it tells you one thing, that he wasn't there for personal aggrandizement. He wouldn't say that if he wanted to gratify himself. He would stay in the office despite anything. He would take a gun and fight to stay there. And I believe that it wasn't the kind of character we saw. And so I know that the Prof has left something, and it is now left onto Ghanaians, not just to speak about them in the normal fashion way as we do our funerals, and at the end of it we say, well, it's because you don't speak ill of a dead person, so let's speak good of him, and that is it. No. I mean, let's practicalize what we are saying. If he wanted peace with us, let's make sure we keep the peace. And in one moment he said, I'm not going to put anybody behind bars until we are sure that they are actually guilty of a crime. I won't do it. And he meant it. And I wasn't alone. We were about a few of us with him. And he was very emphatic and said he was not going to do any such thing. And that if anybody wants him to put anybody behind bars, you should do your work. Make sure you bring the evidence, and make sure the evidence are incriminating enough for the person to go face the court. And he emphasized that I know what I'm doing. I'm a lawyer. So he'll be most remembered for the support of democracy, fair play, rule of law, and his champion for peace in this country. And I think that these qualities are qualities that we need to imbibe. And both his detractors and his friends have agreed that this was a man who we can all stand up and say he built our nation in his own small way. So I believe very strongly that what the professor has left for us is something that we need to begin to think through and see how it can be part and parcel of our lives.
You use the word detractors and friends, but some call them critics. Will the show of love, the massive outpouring of love that we've all witnessed in the last 3 to 4 days for the good old Prof necessarily shut up those critics or wipe away the accounts of history that question some of his actions and inactions?
Well, we are a democracy. We are still free to examine him as a person and as a president. If he can't escape, even in death, he can't still escape the critique about who he was and what he represented. And that will be allowed, What now you cannot do is to talk about him as if he was still alive, But I think that for me, what he has done positively in influencers has is greater than anything he has brought onto us negatively. So when I talk about detractors, it is real. They are the critic. I mean, people who thought that despite everything, he didn't do what he was supposed to do. 3 months into his presidency, people started talking about he being slow, he being not working hard enough, he letting down people, and it took shape in the minds of people, and it carried through until the end of his regime. So it's easy for us to see that this was an unfair perception of the man. Unfair because even he wasn't given the chance to demonstrate what he could do before the critics started coming. I attended a function with a very big man, just at the point he was still appointing his ministers. And he made a remark, and the remark was carried through the newspapers, that he was a disappointment, and the party they fought for had failed them. 3 months. I mean, how could that be? So the kind of critique we give must have some foundation, and the foundation will be built on empirical evidence. And if the evidence cannot show clearly and testify to the reality, we can't continue to accept them as genuine criticism. But indeed, as I said, we are in a democracy, and that's how come we allow everything, and that's how come it is compelling for us to listen when people speak. So the Prof listened to everybody. He accepted those things, quietly, and he successfully steered the nation. His concentration was, how do we make this country a better Ghana? And that question was answered by many of us who believe in him and who put our shoulders to the wheel and who work very hard to ensure that we have a better Ghana. A better Ghana, not just because you can have physical attributes to the country, but because you can have people thinking the other way. We can have people changing their minds and feeling about the state we are, about the people we meet every day, about our neighbors, and not seeking for personal gains necessarily, you know. And at one point, let me just say this again, at one point, he said, what will I gain if somebody wants to corrupt me? He walks into this office. I was sitting with him alone. He said he walks into this office, offers me $1 million or more, and then he says, oh, I have the latest Benz car. Benz car is the one that is a car most people would like to ride in. He offers me a new Benz car. Rashid, what am I going to do with it? I'm the president of Ghana. The people want me to straighten up things and make this nation a better state. So it's not necessary. Corruption shouldn't be part of our lives. And he said, I have a house. I don't need another one. And let me tell you, when the proposal came for him to have a house, president will be built a house, he said he didn't need a house, you know. And go to the house he lives in now, he used to live in. And you would realize that by many, many standards, many people would imagine that a president would have a bigger house, bigger space.
And so he was a very humble,
person.
Selfless person. But I'm sure you can also understand how some people will say, yes, you can't take that away from him. It doesn't necessarily mean that he was able to fight corruption and eschew it even from within his own administration. And for some who criticize him, they are saying, don't confuse their agreement with you that he may have been a humble nobleman with their criticism that it doesn't necessarily mean that he did the job of fighting corruption.
Then that's what I'm saying. It is still out of the perception of the real issues that pertain in his governance. You know, the moment a minister was touched with an issue of corruption and it was acute, that minister was asked to resign. And it happened on not more than an occasion. And we all saw it. Not just resign, but investigations were also made onto the job of the minister. Not just a minister, but many, many people who, you know, had. And I remember at one point we were gathered together as ministers, and he said to us, I'm going to support you 100% as minister because we are working together. But the moment there can be anything proven against you, corruption charges proven against you, you will do it alone. You'll fight the battle alone. And I can assure you that I will not be part of it. And he repeated it several times. I mean, most ministers who were gathered at that meeting would testify, and there were other people who were there.
So even for you, that criticism in itself is not even a fair one?
No, let me explain to you why I'm saying that. So to his person, he thought he was doing his best. To the critics, they could see more than he saw. And both were right. Because if you could see more than the president could see and you criticize, you could not be faulted. Unless you were doing it out of vicious or just mischievous reasons. But other than that, if there were fair criticisms, why not? Because you can't have a perfect system. And the prof did not say he was running a perfect system. He was a human. He was running a human institutions. He was dealing with human beings who have all their faults and whose view about life were subjective.
Sekou, they say you never know what you've got until it's gone. Or are his supporters confusing the eulogies for straight line criticisms?
Well, let me first start by repeating my condolences to the wife, now widow, of Prof, his son, close relatives, and I think the NDC, because he became the leader of the NDC party. I think also we did very well as a nation to give him a befitting farewell and burial. I think it was the first time in our history that we had a president who died in office. I think all of us in government, in opposition, the general public, I think, conducted ourselves very well. And I think it proves that as Ghanaians, we can, in certain key moments, we are united. And I think in many ways we rise above the occasion. But let me say that, you know, when I signed the book of condolence for Prof, I remember writing, I'm not sure if it's the exact words, but I said that I once stood beside you on a political platform. Later I stood against you. But now this death, sad, tragic. Prof, rest in peace. I think it was a sad event, and it was tragic in many ways. It's behind us now as a nation, but or as a people. But in a sense, I think people raised certain issues that were not heeded to. And I think somehow it all came or reflected in the death of Prof. I think moving forward, these issues will come up, and I think as a people, we'll be able to sort them out. I'm referring to issues like if you have a sitting president who is not in good health, it's clear to many. I think we have to address it in an honest manner, because he's not there for himself. He's there not only representing his party, but the nation as a whole. The issue about Prof, I think there's no doubt that Prof, I mean, if you tell me a good man, a bad man, where do I put Prof? I'll put him as a good man. I think, again, and as an academic, he served the country well. But in politics, I think Prof fell short or was weak. And I think, again, as a people, those things will be debated and so on. But from a religious point of view, because I quoted something from the Bible, Proverbs 11:19, I think it says, a truly righteous man attains life, but he who pursues evil goes to his death. I think the meaning here is that we are all sinners, so we all die in that sense, physical death. I think we are given a chance, those who believe that there's a supreme being and so on, then we are given a second chance, a life, of a lasting life. And that's a choice that we make. But clearly the point here is that we all fall short in the eyes of God. So somehow, I think people who, for political reasons, try to portray Prof as a saint and so on, I think, yeah, he's a good man, but we are talking politics here. And again, I think I liked what was earlier said about, there are a lot of things that were done from his government, his presidency, people in his presidency, that did not really reflect on a man who will truly be then a man of God and so on. There seem to have been contradictions. But let me move a little bit away and give you two key moments I saw in the funeral that for me reflects a lot of what is going on in Ghana. I hope one is not too personal, but forgive me if it is. But I want to develop it in a way where people understand what I'm talking about. I think it was more or less a 3-day affair. I think the first 2 days, was it Wednesday and Thursday, people went to sign the book of condolence and so on. I was shocked that GTV, which is supposed to be it's a government station, right? Or a state-owned station.
Mm-hmm. That's a state broadcaster.
Right. Ghana News Agency, again, is a state-owned, right. And I was called because somebody called me to tell me, have I seen what is going on TV? And I read the GNA story. And for me, it represents the lies and deception that many people in this country, or a few people in this country, even when they get to leadership positions, try to push that agenda and build this country on lies and deception. And that cannot be, and many of us will continue to fight that. My reference is to the gentleman who claims to be Nkrumah's son. He was given that opportunity on GTV and introduced as Nkrumah's son. On GNA's story, he was introduced again, the bold-headed Nkrumah's son, Prez Mills, and so on. And I thought that cannot be. Because if you go to the mausoleum, the Kwame Nkrumah mausoleum, I think it is clear, it is stated who Nkrumah's children are. And Nkrumah himself recognized 4 children. So I find it very strange that today, coming from a state media will do a thing like that. I think that is a slap in the face of the family of Nkrumah.
But how does that connect to the Mills issue?
No, but that's why I'm building on it. I'm talking about lies and deceit. Now, the second one was yesterday. I think the funeral was well conducted. Things went smoothly. But I noticed something that caught my eye at the tail end of it. President Rawlings. You know, at the end of they were saying that people should wait for the president, then the other dignitaries and so on to leave. Before then, the rest can leave. And he stepped out, greeted the president, and then went to where Prof is buried and paid his respect. Now, my point is that we all know in this country that I was saying earlier that Prof was an academic who proved himself in that field, and nobody can take that away from him. He served this country well. But politically, he was not self-made. He was picked to become Rawlings's running mate for the 1996 elections. And when Rawlings ended could not run a third term because the Constitution does not allow him to do so, he imposed Mills on the NDC. That he felt Mills was the right man to lead the NDC or continue with to lead the NDC. I've heard him recently say that Prof was an excellent vice president, but he had questions marks about his presidency, and he related it to the ill health. But the issue is that I think it was unfair to Rawlings that he was not in the program to give that last respect to Prof, because really it was he who made Prof where he is. But you see, Rawlings defied that and on his own did it, but because he is Rawlings. But in a way, for some of us, I'm sure condemned him as out of line and so on. But I think some of us took inspiration from that act, and that there are people in this country who will still continue to stand for what they believe in and defy all the odds. Even if people condemn them, call them names and so on, they will still stand for certain principles they believe in. And I think I would take inspiration from that. I think the presidency of Prof, in many ways, for some of us, or for me personally, I think had its limitations. But we should always be guided by the truth in this country. I know in politics, people, in the name of propaganda, they tell lies about people, they deceive the public, but for how long can it go? I think at the end of the day, everything comes out into the open. You cannot hide things forever. And I think we are all learning, not only in life, also in politics and so on. So I think for me, the key things that we have to take is that I think the truth. We should always try to be guided by the truth. I'm not saying we should all become saints and religious people. I think people have the right to choose their path in life. But I think when it comes to the truth, especially in our politics, I think it should always guide us, wherever we belong, NDC, MPP, or any other party. Because we are all interested in building this nation. We are all interested in making life better for all of us as Ghanaians, irrespective of whether we're NDC, MPP, or any political party. I think politics is all about improving the lives of people, developing the country, and I think we are falling short as a nation. I think in the 21st century, when you look at other countries, I think you can see how developed they are and how the people in their country benefit from their development. I mean, now that we're in the Olympics, I mean, look at how Ghana's performance was. And when you look at the other countries, their performance and so on, even when you compare a country like Jamaica, that there's not much of a difference in terms of development with Ghana, but look at what they are doing, at least in a certain area, because at some point people were prepared to invest and so on in different aspects of the development of their society, and it makes their people proud, their key moments. Of course, I can say in the World Cup, Ghana did very well at the World Cup and so on. But what I'm saying is that we need to lift our lives and our spirits as a people. Let me end by saying that, you know, the funeral of Professor Mills reflected in many ways his person. A lot of people turned up. A lot of people were there to mourn him. those in opposition, those in supporting the NDC. But you could see that something was missing. I'm saying that because as a child, you know, I grew up in Egypt. When Nasser died in 1970, they had a funeral. He was a sitting president or head of state. Not only was it a massive funeral, but you could see the mood of the people. Not only charged, but you could see that people really felt that a leader had passed away. But of course, I mean, Nasser was a very charismatic person, very dynamic. He was not only a leader for Egypt, but also the Arab world. So when Nasser spoke on radio or TV, people listened, not only in Egypt, but in the Arab world. So that just gives you the idea of who really is a leader and who is not in a sense. Because I've heard remarks of people saying Prof was a great leader. And honestly, I mean, we don't speak ill of the dead. That's our culture. I think we respect that. And I think we give Prof the due respect. But again, it doesn't mean that we should go out of our way to say things that are not true. Prof can never be described as a great leader. But Prof was, I think, a good person who served his country well, but fell short. He got caught in politics. He made the choice to accept to become a politician, had to play the game of politics, rose to become the highest office of the land, to the highest office of the land. But as I had pointed out long ago, and in that interview on Africa Watch, and I think that's the interview that got me fired from the job that he appointed me, is he didn't really have what it takes to be a leader because he didn't go through a certain process to emerge naturally as a leader. It was imposed on his party and therefore automatically on Ghana. And I think that's why there were a lot of question marks with the presidency.
I see. And so for you, you would still, give him his due as a good man, but your criticisms...
And the president of this country.
Yes, but then your criticisms about his works and his inactions will still stand.
Definitely, and I cannot call, I'll be hypocrite to call Prof a great leader.
I understand that. I'm sure we can respect that. Let me go to Abdul Malik Kwekubako. Kweku?
Yeah. The last 3 days, I mean the 3 final days, I think that we showed that we're a nation of compassion. We've got a lot of humanity in us, and we're quite sensitive to our cultural traditions. Yesterday in particular, I was really proud to be a Ghanaian. The military tradition, was full display. The precision was clear. We were showing what kind of people we are as a nation, as a people, So it was good. The first 2 days, I mean Wednesday, Thursday, there were a few skirmishes with the organizational format, not solely because of the problems, the challenges the organizers encountered, but also those who were urging to be part of the event. Some weren't following the schedule and all the rest. So you can excuse those things. Broadly speaking, I think we did well. So I'm not about to isolate those omissions and highlight them for any purposes. I think we've done well as a nation. It's good. We should be proud. The world really would be looking at Ghana with some positive vibes. So that's good. We've now laid the old man to rest in a very nice place. At the end of the day, the controversy about burial grounds all disappeared into thin air. So it's good for Ghana. I'm told it's been renamed Asunje.
I saw a signboard there that said Asunje Park.
No debate about that. If it's the central government that decided on that, that's fair. Having done that, now issues remain to be tackled. Some of them have been raised here, and as I indicated all the time, as long as we hadn't buried the old man, I was going to exercise a lot of self-restraint in areas to proceed in dealing with the matters. But now I think we can give ourselves a little allowance and start raising certain issues. some have been made some of the points have been made here. You see, I fortunately, before he died, long before he died, even before he became president, had indicated that I had great admiration for him in terms of his personal attributes. I thought he was a very humane guy, a person, if you like. He was, you know, somebody who respected himself and others. So I publicly admired him. And I still stand by that, and I'm happy I did that before he died. But as a political leader and the political platform on which he stood, I had some problems with, and I articulated them quite clearly and publicly. It was good that he didn't get offended. In spite of that, he still kept his friendship, and that again is part of his personal attribute that is great and which we believe everybody should emulate. There are many other Ghanaians like that. There are many other Ghanaian leaders, Ghanaian statesmen who have similar or same attributes. We all not to create the impression that we had only one Ghanaian who lived and had those attributes. That would be a huge indictment on this country if indeed there was only one Ghanaian, the good old professor, who had those attributes. But he had them, and he brought them to bear on his public life, and we recognize it, and I think we still do recognize. It's good to have such a person. But certain points were made here, and that's where I believe, as the campaign begins, issues will be interrogated, and I'm hoping sincerely that will be done in a very responsible and disciplined manner, so that we can all take it on board and live with it, okay? This is a multi-party democracy. It's a competitive politics that we are engaged in. Perhaps we all want the same goal, or we want to reach the same destination, but we have different methods, different styles to approach that destination. And so sooner than later, some of those issues will come up. You see, my good friend, Mr. Pelpo, made a point about some criticisms that he thought were premature, and they may have been, and a bit harsh too early, and they may be, those things may be true. But the truth of the matter is that the good old professor himself, March 22nd, 2001, held his first press conference to examine the Kufuor administration, and was critical of the performance of that administration. The administration, I'm sure, was not even 100 days old. Then, it was fair politics. So, for me, it is not the time of the criticism, either by the opposition or by people within. And I believe that particular reference was by somebody within. It was more of the founder who made that early critique. But the general point I am making is that if it's a question of timing of criticism of a new administration, the good old professor saw nothing wrong with that in principle. So on 21st March 2001, he held a press conference and tackled the Kufuor administration on a variety of issues, most of which he indicted the government relative to its performance and output. That we should clear, and so we should be able to live with some of these things. If it's a question of allegations, he's human. He was human. So he was not infallible. He was not over and above making allegations, some of which turned out not to be sustainable. And we have classic examples. You know, in this edition of the Dispatch, the Daily Dispatch, they killed a publication from the October-November 2008 edition of the African Report, the Africa Report magazine. And this is what the good old professor said about Kufuor's administration, and I quote, this was published in November 2008, a month before the December 2008 election. And he said, we have complained about corruption in this country. The amount of wealth that the Kufuor administration in 7 or 8 years has been able to amass is ridiculous. What does one want? President Kufuor comes to power, and within 1 month, his son is able to acquire an $8 million hotel. True or false? Not true. Not true. the Hotel Kufuor saga, if you want to use that name, itself was 2005. It could not have been 1 month after Kufuor came into office. 2, a constitutional creature like Shraj investigated that matter and put out its finding to the effect that President Kufuor, don't forget, President Kufuor's conduct was also investigated. In that case, he was a sitting president whose conduct was probed by Shraj. And it found out that there was no conflict of interest and there was no abuse of office relative to President Kufuor. Now, with regards to his son, it was clear that he actually did, if you like, financial engineering through banks that are identifiable with documentation before Shraj. So, relative to this matter, until and unless somebody brings evidence contrary to the findings made by Shraj, the evidence is that there was no corruption involved. Okay? But candidate Mills, in campaign mode, relative to election 2008, made this statement. There are many other examples, but I'm not going to use them because I just wanted to point out that we are all human. From up to look down, all of us in the process make mistakes. I, making this case, I'm guilty of that particular trait. I have, in my course, the course of my practice as a journalist, put out information, some of which turned out to be untrue, and some of which we had to apologize, retract and apologize, some before the National Media Commission. So that's what we all are. I'm not about to say we should state the personal attribute of somebody, state it factually, start on that correct premise, but don't draw a wrong conclusion by exaggerating those attributes to make one person stand out as if he had no faults of his own. I don't think that's fair to even the good professor. Having known him and having interacted with him, at least I'm not claiming to be one of his best friends. I'm a younger friend of his, but quite of some long standing since 1994, 1993, late 1993. I can speak that yes, he was a good man, was a sincere man, was an honest man, okay, and not a reckless, irresponsible politician. But in terms of his presidency, I have difficulties with some areas, which I believe time would allow us to deal with. Otherwise, we should be proud we are Ghanaians. The last 3 days, particularly yesterday, I think was a great day in this country's history. I remember February 26th, 1998, when Dr. Liman, another former president, was laid in state at the Independence Square. I believe this is only 2 things. But one died in the office, but was a former president when we were burying him because we had a sitting president who was presiding over the event. Dr. Liman died out of office, but was a former president when we were burying him. And we had what we call people's funeral for him because his family rejected the government proposal to make a state burial for, you know, the hangover from the PNDC to the Rawlings era. It was a difficult situation. We handled this with 2 of these former heads of states or presidents. We laid in state at the Independence Square. Thousands of people showed up. There was a slight difference because that was not a state burial. It didn't have this kind of military tradition and all those things, protocol. But incidentally, Professor Mills, then vice president, was present as leader of the government delegation at that funeral. And you remember the Nigerian former president, that was Shegu Shagari, was representing Nigeria. Incidentally, Jerry Rawlings was the president. And you know the nervousness that surrounded the situation. But he showed up for about 3 minutes. Everybody was seated, unannounced. President Rawlings appeared from nowhere, filed past the remains of Dr. Liman for about 2-3 minutes, and he was out of the place. That created another stare, the widening stare. But of course, his vice president was there, had paid his, official function. Yes, had paid his respects and everything on behalf of government. So this is what we've had. One was people's funeral, the other was a state burial. Both classic, both showed love. You'd be amazed. Dr. Liman's burial, there were people across the political divide. People said so many positive things in his memory. People who had served the PNDC and NDC, who were in government, sitting ministers, came and paid tributes to Dr. Liman. Nobody spoke of his negatives. Everybody spoke of his positives. I think that is what we are. I'm beginning to hear people say that, oh, that's hypocrisy. that shows a certain part of us that is hypocritical? I'm not too sure. Okay, there may be few people who may have said certain things against him, who today are praising him. They are so few, they are insignificant. The generality of the tributes, I think, were well-founded.
Now, people look, for instance, to many of his critics who are talking about some of his personal attributes, and they frame that to say, you know, then you were wrong and you are now coming around the corner. Can his critics still find their voice? Those
guys are distorting. They've created a distortion of their own and are inviting us to interrogate it. Okay? Those people who are highlighting the personal attributes of the late president, some of them held those positions even before he died. Okay? Even before he died. And they had every right, they were entitled to criticizing his administration and governance style. They were. Look, a classic case. Let's raise the case of the Woyome saga. I won't go into details because both of us are facing contempt on those matters. You know. But the point that was made by Yoko, that he had on 2 occasions intervened to stop payment. The first one being that Bank of Ghana shouldn't pay. I'm sure the Bisata veteran has brought a new angle into the picture, but it's there. Then the second one, that go to court, file an injunction to stop the proceedings, and eventually the monies were paid. The issue has been raised as that when it became clear that monies had been paid in full, what happened to those people he instructed not to allow that to happen? What happened to them? Were they sanctioned? No. So who says I cannot raise that? I mean, he, in his quest to become president, leveled criticism, some of which were genuine, against his predecessor. And in the campaign, leveled criticisms against the candidate that was his immediate rival, Akufo-Addo, some of which were legitimate. You understand? Mm-hmm. Some were legitimate. Mm-hmm. Those that were not, some, it was one instant case, and I'll have to state that before I end my case. There was an instant case where he made a case of government, Akufo administration had disconfiscated properties of drug barons and handed over one of it to Bumpty Akufo-Addo, who is Nana Akufo-Addo's brother. It turned out not to be true. And the gentleman filed a writ against the palaver and against Professor Mills, candidate Mills. Eventually, his lawyers went and settled the matter with Bumpty. So Bumpty left the case alone. That's human being, but in the campaign mode. Maybe others around him had given him that info, and he believed it and put it out there. So look, let's be honest. The point, I don't know if indeed it is true that he was the most vilified president. I don't believe so. I believe there was some amount of vilification, some amount of insult, some amount of abuses directed at him, some from within, and more seriously from within. That hurts more than anything else. Okay? But go back and check all our heads of states, particularly the democratically elected ones. All of them suffered. Kufuor was called Atai. You know what Atai meant? Okay? So, just a sense of proportion. I am saying we should have a sense of proportion when we are dealing with this matter. Okay? I've been checking the Hansard in terms of tributes that have been paid to our past leaders, some of whom were not presidents. But a certain thing comes true. With all the caution in Parliament, the idea is that, look, let's emphasize the positives. Let's not provoke debate. The Speaker allows them to make statements in memory. And the idea is that this is not supposed to provoke a debate. And so you, the person making the statement, you walk a tightrope and make sure you will not provoke your political opponents.
To respond.
On 1 or 2 occasions, somebody could not keep to that. A tribute being paid to Dr. Busia on 16 March 2007 by Professor Jan Boafo. He went to the extreme and he provoked Leokran and Bagwin to come in with other issues. So some negatives or minuses of Busia were highlighted on the floor of the House. And that was not the only one, but this is the most classic example I've seen. Otherwise, throughout the parliamentary thing, they try as much as possible to keep to the middle and make sure the dignity of the departed is upheld.
Let's talk some politics associated with the late president's death. And some observe the outpouring of love and extolling of his personal values, and suggest that this would, at the end of the day, translate into sympathy votes for President Mahama as we head for the December polls. I don't know. Has that come across your table? What do you think?
Well, first of all, let me make the statement that it's too early yet, to begin to examine the Mills administration and to say all the things that we would say to get people thinking that we very soon are departing from all the tributes we have been paying to him just even yesterday. And I'll encourage us to hold our guns yet, because I think that we need to have the positive sink in. I mean, it's just a day after the funeral. Let's have the positive sink in, and let's begin to reflect on those positives, and let's begin to let them be part of our lives. So the moment you begin to say that certain things, it does appear that it doesn't matter to be a good person, because when you die, those good things will be said. But importantly, it's the bad things that people want to talk about, and that's what makes the man. But I think that I made a point here that Prof was not a perfect person, and he did not claim to run a perfect administration. So upon that, let me now go into say what, respond to the issue you have raised. You're asking whether, because of what positive energy generated out of Prof's funeral, whether it will translate into sympathy votes for President John Mahama. If yes, if there's any at all, it will be very, very small, because the president is a man much loved by the people, and I know at the time he became the vice president, the pressure on the government at the time, on the party at the time, was so huge. I mean, everybody, including opposition, were saying, look, this is a man we love. We want him to be our vice president. We wanted him to be, and then it translated into he becoming the running mate then. So his very charisma, character, and disposition was compelling in the minds of people and struck the chord. We have transited from being that kind of radical opposition person who would look into the face of people and insult or say things about them that are bad, into a position where the person will reflect the people, the soberness of the people, and will tackle issues of the economy and of governance. And that was what was made of John Mahama, now His Excellency President John Mahama. And those qualities are still there. I listened to him when he said, look, let's not drag our politics into the mud. Let's make sure this politics is clean, and let's not insult each other. That is the man. And of course, like I said, we are not running a perfect system, and individuals are normally subjected to making mistakes. So you can still find these things even in him and in all of us. But on the whole, I think he's the kind of person we are looking for. The Gaddafis of old, and even the era of Jerry Rawlings, are fading off in Africa. We don't want them any longer. We don't want situations where people talk more than they can act. And we don't want radical, overly radical positions. Some of them have done very well for their people. Rawlings cannot be faulted because that was a choice of the generation at the time. Gaddafi cannot be faulted because that was a choice of the generation at the time. But I'm saying that those choices have transited or have moved on to sober leaders in a democratic setting where these people are required to think more than they act. They are required to use to demonstrate real real politics,
And it's those attributes of President Mahama that you are
and those are the
expecting that he will ride on.
Yeah, those are the ones I believe the people will want to see in the next
But I'm
elections.
sure you've also noticed that, just like you're saying, yes, it's very early after the burial to even get into too much politics. Already a day after the burial, there are new billboards going up. I just saw one as I was driving through this morning, you know, showing President Mills and President Mahama, you know, literally handing over to him saying, thank you, or the Better Ghana agenda continues. And, you know, and there's a subtle hint that, I mean, it may even need to be politically appropriate to tap into a bit of that sympathy and use it as we get into the December polls. That's not a consideration at all?
Well, I haven't seen this billboard you're talking about, but, you know, this, we are running a system where, for the love of a system or a party, many people can do things on their own, you know, put up billboards on their own, and these are things that would normally happen. But if it does happen, I believe that the response should also be of a sober nature. I mean, this is not an attack on anybody. It's an act that can be examined, and that can be either approved or rather, you know, otherwise. Also, on a public display on a billboard, you know. So I'm saying that let's bring a lot of decorum in our politics, and that's the tune or the tone of the president of today, you know. And I think that because of his very nature, I believe that Ghanaians will vote for him on his merits, not just because of sympathy votes. If you depend on sympathy votes, he's not going to go anywhere. I believe that His Excellency John Mahama has his own quality. He has his own agenda. Of course, a better Ghana must be a foundation for all of us, including even the opposition. Who wouldn't want to transform Ghana from being what it is to a better Ghana if you meet it at a point of a transition? So I know that the agenda continues, whether His Excellency John Mahama will want it or not. It's compelling for him to transform Ghana in his own small way.
We'll talk a bit more about him and what he can feasibly do in the next 5 months. Just talking of the politics before I go to the other guest here. There's been the suggestion that, yes, there's this cloud of unity over our nation today following these events. Is there any way that that cloud, that feeling can be sustained so that what used to prevail a few months perhaps prior to this, a lot of acrimony, a lot of, you know, bickering, can be toned down permanently? Or this is just a passing phase? This is who we are. We're sensitive to the moment, but after a while, very soon, we'll get back into our old mode.
Thank you. I think that this is the reason I'm saying that we should veer away from hardcore politics and allow those positive attributes to sink in, you know. And I don't fault Sekou Nkrumah when he said that he cannot agree that he was a great leader, but he agrees that he was a good man. Now, the goodness, the quality of goodness which was found in his leadership is something we need to tap in. Not all the American presidents were good people or were great leaders, but for all of them, they have tapped in something which they have used to build America today. You know, there were some who were almost harassed out of office, but in the end, they pick on them. Some who were killed in office, but they left something which they use. The anger, frustration of people were culminated into a single person taking a gun, hunting the president down and shooting and killing him. In the end, they have the quality in them which the nation rallied around and built on it, and it becomes a manifest nation, great nation as we see them. The human beings we see are normally not what we are looking for, but what is the metal made in them. And I think that because of what the President Mills stood for, and because of the quality in him which some of us see are qualities that a leader should have: humility, and committed leadership, respect for the rule of law and democracy, committed to the service of mankind, willing to die extra for the nation. Even in his sick bed, he's willing to get out to say that, look, I want to work. And he died working. At a point when everybody thought he was going to rest, he sent a letter to us and said that, to Parliament, and told us he was traveling to Nigeria. That same day, I met the secretary, and he told me, yes, the president did that. And when he even wrote the letter, that morning, he sent it to the president to look at before he sent it to Parliament. And the president made a correction on something. He went back to his office, typed the letter, sent it to Parliament, and then subsequently, the news was that the president was taken ill and, almost at the point of death. So the point is this, that because of the other qualities I've talked about, plus the need for us to die a little for our country, these are attributes we can't take away. And that's why I'm saying let's concentrate on that. Let's make sure we build on it. Let's make sure it becomes part of our body politic. Let's make sure we transform it into the lives of our people who are willing to be leaders. Let us know the burden of leadership on every single person when you are a leader, and the extent to which you should serve this nation rather than yourself. He had a house. He said, I have a house. I don't need another house. You go to see the house. It doesn't reflect, for many people, it doesn't reflect the standard.
The house of a president.
Yes, but he was satisfied with that.
And for you, those values are the ones
they are
should
ones
reign
we should.
supreme in our minds.
We
Sekou,
should
tell me about sympathy and about unity, and then I'll let Godwin and Kweku speak before we go for our next break.
Right, but let me disagree with my former boss. He was Minister of Youth and Sports.
So you
at
worked
some
under
point
him.
when John Kennedy, Bill Clinton, those are names, I think, great leaders from the U.S. But I don't think they were good gentlemen. We all know the scandal that hit Bill Clinton. He was a married man who ends up having an affair with a young lady in the White House. John Kennedy, described as a playboy and so on, but they were considered great leaders. So you can be a great leader and not necessarily a good man. And again, the issue of he prefers conservative to radical leadership. But the point is that you can be conservative. Is that going to improve our economy, give us economic prosperity and so on? You can be radical. So the point is not being conservative or radical. The point is, and even let me stretch it, whether you are capitalist or socialist, the point is that whatever that philosophy or ideology, how are you using it to serve the interests of the people? So the point for me is that I think the key moment is Ghanaians, I think, have matured politically. Now it's a system where we choose our leaders through the ballot box. Every 4 years we have the opportunity. So the point is that it cannot be based on sympathy. It will have to be on performance. And they will look at the performance of the NDC in the last 3.5 years now, with the few months now. I think the change of leadership is kind of too late in the day now. So there's very little President John Mahama can do to turn things around. But the issue is, and again, I'm taking, I observed what happened yesterday, and that when Rawlings shook his hand, at least to the public now, it sees that he has opened a certain line of communication. So it's now up to President John Mahama to show or prove to all of us whether he can now bridge that gap in the NDC and that division in the NDC. If he's able to do that under his leadership, then I think he can bring consolidate the votes of the NDC. If he's unable to do that, then unfortunately it will go against the NDC. I think there's very little between President Mills and President Mahama. I think they are practically the same, but one is older, one is younger. So in terms of going around and campaigning, having the energy, and of course in relatively good health. So John Mahama has the energy to do that, go around and so on. So obviously it's a plus there for the NDC, because then you'll be more visible candidate. But in terms of style, I think both seem to be, don't have that energy, radicalism in them that unfortunately is very much needed, especially on a platform like the NDC that traces its roots to a revolution, and also a social democratic party that I always say that your focus is lifting or addressing the needs and interests of the less privileged in society who are in the majority. So you need to be a strong leader to be
able to
able
carry
to,
them along.
because you are fighting, you see, the world order and so on, it goes against the less privileged and so on. So for you to emerge as a leader of that, the left of politics, you have to be strong because you are facing a stronger opposition.
Godwin, tell me, you think that this whole sympathy thing is going to be downplayed eventually? And if it does, I don't know what you make of Seku's analysis. And while at that, is this whole unity cloud going to just pass over us at some point in time?
Well, I do not think that the average Ghanaian voter is that sentimental. You can categorize the issues that the average Ghanaian voter will look out for: conduct and performance. Or let's say conduct and promise performance. So the conduct will have to do with the manner in which the person proposing to become the leader relates with the people, without necessarily having to do with delivering on material things. Is the person humble? At least we know that everybody looks out for those qualities. How does the person take pressure? Because the pressure will come. How does he respond to criticism? The criticism will come. I mean, there are so many things that will come that the person will need to handle in a certain manner that the people will view as appropriate. As to whether or not President Mahama can deliver on that, the few months at least, we can see that he has an opportunity his opponent or rival doesn't have, because he is a president now. So he can prove that yes, if given some time, he can do this or he cannot do that. Then on the issue of the performance, the economy will definitely be an issue, because after talking about humility, after talking about respect, the person goes back home and there is nothing to eat. He will begin to find out, where does he get food to eat the next day? And that can be a reason to vote. So President Mahama's ability to convince the people that, yes, I have the appropriate conduct, but also, yes, I have what it takes to deliver on your material needs. These, to me, are the critical indices that the average voter will be looking out for. But putting that in the context of sympathy, what does it really mean? Are the people going to say that, well, the late president had a vision. We did not quite understand and appreciate that vision. Now we do. This gentleman promises to continue with that vision. You are likely to get people who will also use that type of analysis to vote. But in terms of the mathematics, I mean, we cannot, because we don't have the empirical facts. But broadly speaking, these are general factors that I believe people will take into account. Now, coming back to the issue of unity, I think that there is no choice for the end. The unity will come as a matter of course. The point had to do with the late president's style. I mean, many people refer to his style. So if that person is no more there, then the style no longer becomes an issue. It depends on how the current president will deal with those particular issues. And I think that it is in his own interest that he seek the unification of the party as one of the projects which the late president, if you want to say so, could not achieve until his death. So if he makes unity within the party, and of course, unity outside of the party, as one of the things, because I mean, you just read something about the minority that is saying that it regrets it could not reconcile with him. To what extent will the current president then take the step to get the minority to reconcile with him? What were the issues that, I mean, divided them, I mean, that kept them apart from the late president? So it is not going to be an entirely sentimental issue, but we can't also take away from it, having regard to the fact that the time is so short, the memories and all of that will still be there, but it is not going to be a decisive factor.
I'm going to go for a little break. When I return, I'll start with Abdul Malik Kwekubako as he comments on this, and then we'll look at, the 5 months ahead of President John Dramani Mahama. What are the key things that perhaps he should focus on tackling, or the key moves that he should focus on making, even politically? And does he even have time in these 5 months to do anything significant, whether it's politically or in terms of running the country? Let me read what some of our listeners are sending to us on Twitter, on Facebook, on our email platforms, and by text. I'll start with Audu Lash Jr. He says, the reality of the death of President Mills actually dawned on many Ghanaians when his remains were carried through the principal streets of Accra and finally laid to rest at the park. President Mills, your peaceful nature and massive achievement will forever remain in the annals of history. Demri Fedue. Amwa Kweku Sheriff says, I want to express my condolences to the family of our late president. May he rest in peace. Gideon Betty says, President Mills, gone too soon. Your propagation of peace will be remembered. Ilyasu Haruna says, may the gentle soul of President Mills rest in peace. I entreat the family and all well-meaning Ghanaians to take heart. Death is inevitable. We wish him all the best in the next life. Shaibu says, Ghanaian security services were on top of the issue. They really exhibited it yesterday. Let's congratulate them. This is not the Ghana security services I know some years back. Ayuko to them. K-Sim says, it's interesting to observe that a majority of people who tout the late president's qualities, especially his humility and tolerance, keep talking only about his qualities. They are the very people who least reflect these qualities. Sometimes it takes death for the living to appreciate the obvious. As citizens, we should demand of politicians to either improve or stay on this elevated level. Mancha Bruce says, I think yesterday's occasion was a momentous one. People across the political divide, across the continent of Africa and the world. It was, however, instructive to state that some senior members of the ruling NDC and government over the past 2.5 weeks have been casting a long tapestry of aspersions and innuendos against the MPP and certain individuals in their own party, including the Rawlingses, with regard to the death of the president. My candid advice to them is that they should be careful, because the reactions that may be elicited as a result of this may not be good for Ghana. Rest in peace, Mr. President. On Twitter, Elias says, the president is gone the way of all mortals. For the NDC, they should use his death for sympathy votes. It's a joke. Demi Fedue to the prof. DP Kwesi says, could you please ask Sekou to tell us who a great leader is? Because I'm kind of confused. How then do we classify Obama? Kujoa 977 sent us a tweet. He says, we're listening to you through multi-TV this morning. Solomon Mensah says, the funeral was nicely organized, but to say Prof. Mills was a great leader, he brought a lot of negative things to himself. Nana Koz says, the late president was a great academician, a gentleman and humble man, God-fearing, but I don't think he succeeded as a president. So people have their various thoughts of it. Just a couple of your comments coming through on Twitter. One of our listeners tweeting under the name Mabu For You says, Professor was a very good academician, but when it comes to his leadership style, some of us beg to differ. Yet we will say fare thee well to him. One of our listeners also tweeting under the name Dasegla says, we liked his attributes because we could abuse it, and he will say nothing about it. It's a shame to us. And Bernard Ajiman says, the funeral was generally good. Soon as the funeral ended, we have come back to our realities. Lights off at home, no potable water, etc. We need to deal with these. So let me come to you, Kweku. And I was asking about, this possibility of sympathy votes. But just as you comment on that, let's go into the bigger subject of 5 more months for John Dramani Mahama. How much can he really do politically and even in terms of governance in 5 months? And what will be your expectations if he's able to do anything in these spaces?
Well, I'm sure no serious politician or strategist would proceed on the basis of calculating how much sympathy vote he could get relative to the coming election. No serious politician would do that. You may think about it and you leave it there. You must go to the brass tacks and deal with the issue. So sympathy vote, very marginal, almost negligible. And I would advise their strategy. I don't have to advise them. I think they know it. They wouldn't waste their time cultivating sympathy vote. The sympathy was a cut across the political divide. And I'm saying a large measure of it was genuine and sincere, as far as I'm concerned. So please, that's really out. And you see, the truth of the matter is that President Mahama is serving the unexpired term of the Mills administration. That's what it is. It's essentially the same administration. And incidentally, in this case, he was a vice president, and a very active vice president, very visible. A lot of opportunities were given to him by his boss to operate, and he did so, in my opinion, quite effectively, very visibly. So it's even difficult, and the MPP chaps had a certain description of the administration, that Mills Mahama administration. I used to debate them and was insisting that it is Mills administration in the real sense of the word. Now looking back with the benefit of hindsight, I can see the political capital they're going to gain from that, because really they'll say the value is the same as it were. You know? And in a way, in terms of personal attributes, President Mahama has, it's important for this kind of discussion to use the right designation, is a very affable person, you know, very humane. I have always said he was a brother, you know, and I have a reason for saying so. I like him as a person, I'll be honest with you. So he's the person who doesn't also generate unnecessary, undue controversy. They have almost the same attributes, you know, and he's challenged. Clearly, you're telling us of a billboard, which I haven't seen, but it tells the story.
Opposite the Fiesta Royale hotel.
Yeah, it tells the story. The Mills administration's track record in this last 3.5 years is what apparently the NDC will bring to the campaign platform. I've always said that the NDC is not only 3.5 years in terms of governance. It's almost, is it 12? Nearly 12 years. They had NDC 1, NDC 2, and NDC 3. That's the truth in terms of constitutional Fourth Republic. So 8 plus 3.5 is almost 11.5. But we are talking of the Mills administration. That's 3.5 of something, though he had 4 years as vice president in NDC 2. That track record will be examined. In examining it, both President Mahama and former President Mills will be held equally responsible for their output. And it will be a fair ball game. There will be nothing wrong with it. President Mahama will be moving out there, pointing to projects that the Mills administration undertook, some of which he, as vice president, actually commissioned. It's a very interesting situation. So I don't see a dichotomy at all between the Mahama-led 5-month administration and the General Mills administration. They will be challenged on the same level. So issues of the state of the economy, issues of corruption, how they fought corruption, you know, the STS failed project, the project that I backed vigorously, seriously. People would question how it happened, you know, because there were promises that were made to deliver the 30,000 housing units and all that. Those things are responsible. Incidentally, in this STS, there are a lot of people who link the vice president more than even the departed president. They will have their pluses. The Chinese 3 billion, again, a project, an initiative that I backed and still back, I think was very useful. So there are pluses and minuses which they will bring to bear on the stage. I think, you see, because it's the line between John Mills and John Mahama is very thin in terms of the governance. Perhaps there are few things John Mahama, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind now, in this contest, the respect is already shown, must do or can do to throw a certain distinctive ring around his administration. A very small-minded person like me, I would propose that he should move into the Flagstaff House as, even if not the residence, at least the official place. Somebody may argue that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is situated and that can create some problems, but I think it's important.
What will be the significance?
That is our presidential residence and office. I wonder what the Indians think of us after assisting us to put up that edifice. The edifice the former president, the late former president, described as excellent and impressive, imposing. You remember the first day he went there with President Kufuor?
Yes, on a tour as part of the handing over processes.
And it's just sitting there because we were told of all sorts of, I mean, imaginary security precautions and things. 3.5 years if we are unable to resolve security risks element relative to that palace, then this country is not worth living for or dying for. 3.5 years, you have security couples who can't resolve that problem. It's just, we all know was a fallacious explanation or reason.
But look at the politics of it. If President John Mahama is, very strongly tied to President John Mills and is going to run on President Mills's record and the things that he stood for, everybody knows that President Mills, for the greater part of his tenure, never really wanted to use the Flagstaff.
And President Mills said that he was waiting for security clearance. That's what he said. So President Mahama can tell us, perhaps, that look, I've moved in because there's security clearance. But you still have a distinctive ring around you. You are trying to ring fence. Because you see, whether you like it or not, you're already organically linked. I'm saying that this is just politics. As I said, I'm a layman. I'm just putting out something.
And now we're talking politics. Actually,
yes, so this is what I'm just putting out. It may not have any substance. And then, of course...
you actually agree with him?
See, the president has also made a point about his communication team and the kind of language, the content of what they say. It's a very significant statement to make. The former late president, also the late former president, also publicly admonished his people, and not even his people, everybody across the political divide who engage in public discourse to use decent language. But we all know that occasionally there were people who were within the government communication team that also went haywire. We know. We don't have to personalize things, so I won't mention names. And people wondered whether sanctions were effected relative to those pronouncements and those personalities. Now, for the new president to say, renew the call and indicate that sanctions will be imposed, is implicitly, in my opinion, is a recognition that perhaps there was a deficit relative to the earlier admonition and how it was implemented or dispensed. So he's renewed the caution to his communicators. If we have examples sooner than later, and because politics has started, you will see, and he disciplines one or two, or indeed he reshuffles some of those well-known voices into certain areas where they will not become too audible or loud, that may also help his team. Then some reshuffle. It's 5 months, I can be honest with you, 5 months is not enough time to do many serious, dramatic, drastic things. But there are few things you can do. Some may have symbolic effect, but still could help you to say that, look, not that I'm different from, or I'm betraying my boss or team, because he cannot. And that's not his character anyway, I know that. So, but in these 5 months, there are a few things that perhaps we could have done better. And that's human. So I am seeking to do it in a better way. Look, last week I made my own view here. For me, if I were his advisor, I would say take a hard look, long look at the Attorney General's department. And at the ministerial level, quickly remove the Deputy Attorney General.
Why?
Oh, but it's bad news. It was bad news for the late former president. On this your very station, he told the whole world that government, the state, had no case against Wuyobi. And so that's why they executed a deal. Only for government, the same government he served, to come back and say, no, we have a case, so we are even prosecuting this man on a criminal level and also civil level seeking the money. If I were him, I would have resigned. Elsewhere, in other jurisdiction, I would have resigned on my own, voluntarily. But he's still there. So why not? In his own interest and in the collective interest of the government and the party that is going back to an election, if he's reshuffled, if not sacked, even if not sacked, but reshuffled elsewhere, it will help public perception. These are petty things.
In terms of governance, Can anything really happen? Yes, you've mentioned the politics. You can mention a bit more, but even in terms of governance, one of the heavy weights that was, on the shoulder of the NDC a few months ago had to do with corruption, vis-a-vis Woyomi and all of these judgments. Is there?
But you see, that is the part. In touching the Deputy Attorney General, and this is not personalization, you are also giving a message that this judgment, that whole controversy, I'm seeking to unravel it. Of course, it's in court. So it was an attempt that we are seeking to unravel. But people realized it was sluggish. Prosecution was sluggish. The judge kept on complaining. We all know this. It wasn't going well for the administration. Okay, that perhaps there's a deliberate attempt not to fix the problem. But there are people who were in responsible positions and whose conduct, actions or inactions, omissions or commissions, led to that situation. And some of them are still around. And they are free. You see, I remember that tax that the NDC in opposition waged on the predecessor government on corruption. Corruption was a huge issue, campaign issue. Huge one. And at one stage we were told that they would not even wait for evidence to be provided. Whatever is put in the newspaper will be enough grounds. But you remember President Mills in office now asked for evidence. That he's a lawyer. And that legally you must bring evidence. I said, that's politics. Now the reality has hit home hard. Okay, so he must do certain things. I'm saying whatever he does is not sufficient to change the scales. Bottom line is the state of party organization, state of party mobilization, state of party unity. For me, that's the bottom line.
But at least he can not do nothing.
Nothing is a disaster. Something, however small, will be helpful. Bottom line, of course, Kojo, is the state of the economy. The arguments, many of them will remain the corruption and state of economy. Okay, that will be the two basic pillars, as far as I'm concerned. But governance side, petty things here and there can help in terms of your campaign. Here I'm speaking as if somebody who wants to assist his campaign. That's the scenario we are drawing. Yes. Whether it's sufficient or not is immaterial.
You don't know. The Honorable Rashid Pepo seems to agree that moving into the Flagstaff House may be a good beginning.
Yes. I know Kweku is making a very genuine comment. And I have that thinking as well. I mean, I can't see myself, if I were His Excellency John Mahama, driving past where my former boss is lying every morning to work and back. You see him and, the feeling. And besides that, I have always said that the castle is becoming, a moribund piece of architecture, which should no longer reflect our presidency, because the castle is a colonial structure. It's a slave mentality, and I mean, we don't have to keep our president there forever and ever. And John is a new person coming into this whole business, and His Excellency John Mahama, and moving into the Flagstaff House is nothing bad. I think he should do it. Security checks are, if there are still security problems, they should fix it. You authorize that they should fix it.
Because I was going to ask whether the shape of the building, as was one time alluded to, and the security challenges have gone away.
They should fix the challenges if they are. I mean, I don't know what they are. Somebody with a security eye can tell us exactly what the problem is. But offhand, you can see that it's too exposed to the people who are passing by. But so also is the White House.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
When you pass by
Pennsylvania Avenue and the White House,
you see the White House there. You see the entrance of the president. He comes down and he walks through into his house, and everybody at the full glare of the people. So we need to ensure that the security does its job well, and keeps the president. And again, I know that there were complaints about leakages, even in the president's.
Those were false media publications.
Well, I hear there are leakages somewhere.
They were false.
And
because your committee, you set up a committee, the transition team, made up of experts, architects, surveyors, engineers, all that. I have a report here, which gave it classic bill of health, clean bill of health, and said that the president could move in terms of the presidential facility to stay in and the office. It's all here. I have the report.
Yeah, for me, if these things are all cleared, there's no reason he shouldn't move in.
So further politically and even in terms of governance, 5 months, what can he do? What should he do?
Well, he's a very, very skilled man. He knows what he... Now, I think that he should be very careful. You know, it's important that some small distinction is done. Something is done to show that he's in charge. I believe in that. And, but not too much to
disrupt
to rock the boat too much. We need everybody now on board to campaign and win these elections. And we need 2 terms, and we need this one term badly. That John Mahama everybody has talked about, that quality everybody has identified in him must now be brought to light. I mean, in practical terms, we have a lot to point at. I don't want to be counting them because then it will generate the same kind of controversy that I think we should not go into now. The projects we have done, electricity rules and blah, 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 they are all there for him to use. But essentially, we need this person to come on board, to ride on his own personality, to see how that personality we voted for, you know, can now be in charge and come to terms with the real issues of the day.
So a bit of a reshuffling?
Yeah, something. I don't know how he's going to do it. If it is reshuffle, fine. If it is any kind of change that will create a personality that we want to see in him, you know, that he's in charge. It's important.
Let's talk governance. Corruption is a big deal. Single payment for NHIS was a big promise of the NDC in 2008. It remains something that's yet to see the light of day. You take the whole theme of a government that is open and transparent and that acts with dispatch on national matters. Can he do anything, at least on some of these little themes in these 5 months?
Yeah, he can do a lot. In politics, a day is a long time. And so it's 4 months, not 5 months. This 4 months is an opportunity for him to put in perspective all the achievements. You know, he worked with His Excellency, former President, to bring to light. And these issues about corruption, it's now time to begin telling Ghanaians what we have done with it. A lot of work had gone behind the scenes to tackle corruption. Lots of things have happened, some in the public domains, others behind the scenes. Let's now see what the government did, you know, because I know of so many things that happened that the president himself intervened in most instances. Let's now see them in broad daylight and see how, you know, we can bring sunshine into our governance administration. But again, I believe that the issue of corruption is one that, you know, will play a lot of role in this election, because corruption is sapping away the energies of the nation. And I believe John Mahama's own track record as a person will be seen to be having a great influence in his campaign. And I know that he is a person who we can trust a lot. You know, we can trust him, and so he has a mantle of power now and can demonstrate. The NHIS, now National Health Insurance Authority, is we have the relative facing confronting us now, and I hear there has been some understudy, some feasibility study, and they are using, I think, Ashanti to be as a
For capitation?
Yeah, they are using Ashanti.
That didn't go very well.
Yeah, so that tells us that, I mean, it's a national issue. And I believe that it's not just going to be this administration, but once it's been pronounced as a possibility, all administrations should come on board and believe, you know, the Mills administration, the John Mahama administration must look at it to see the possibility of it.
So you seem to think that, particularly because of the party's disposition, it requires some sort of radical approach to be able to whip up the votes from its core base, and even translate that into governance. And maybe while at that, you may want to give us a definition of a great leader. As you
yeah, that's what I was going to start, because somebody asked. So I just want to ask that person to ask himself that question. If we say, who is the greatest leader Ghana has had, does he think President Mills will get the first slot? Let's ask, or should ask himself, who is the greatest leader Africa has had? Does he think President Mills will be among the first 10? So the way he'll answer those questions, the guy who asked, I think, will tell him what a great leader is. And then the names that will come to mind. What are the names that will first come to his mind? Ghana's greatest leader, Africa's greatest leader. The names that will first come to his mind, I think you should tell him.
And the attributes of those persons may at best
I don't think President Mills can be placed in the first 10.
No,
talking about African.
I'm saying that whoever he chooses as, the great leaders.
Yeah, he should. Then they are the ones who should best represent that, because it's about your vision and achievements too. But let me say that I think President Mahama has very little time on his hand, but there are a few things he can do. But I would say that as for the moving from the castle to the Flagstaff House, it's just symbolic. Yeah. But there are serious problems with it. Because I was with the NDC campaigning in 2008, and we all condemned that building, that how can the government spend so much when there are other priorities. So I think that was the problem why Prof found it very difficult to move there. And I think the same problem will also be with President Mahama, that it somehow, then what were we as those campaigning for NDC and so on, saying when we're condemning the MPPs, whether it was a loan or not, spending so much money or getting so much money to be spent on a presidential policy. I don't think that's a priority, and I still don't think that's a priority for a president of this country. And I think, you see, sometimes people think some of us are controversial, but they forget that it's the controversial people, so-called, are the ones who change the world, because they think outside the box. And then the things, traditions that are bad and wrong, they make sure they fight it. So we now, society becomes dynamic and progressive. But it's interesting that there are two things that come to my mind, and I think you raised one of them, the National Health Insurance Scheme. I think it's a brilliant idea, because a lot of Ghanaians cannot afford, when they are sick, their families are sick. But what has the NDC in power done with it to even explain and get people to be committed to it? I think very little. So Ministry of Information, instead of playing politics, I think those are the areas they should be focused on, how to explain these government policies and directions and how it benefits the people directly and educate them. And then again, how far is government going in making it accessible to people, this health insurance scheme? Because basically if you pay, even if it's once a year or once in a life, you pay an amount of money. But then after that, if you have illnesses, it can be dealt with for free, and it lifts your burden and it cushions the hardship and so on. So I think that is the way to go. So if he can do something about it now under his leadership, I think that will be a plus for
within these 4 months.
Well, if he can, that's the point. If he can, let him do something about it. National Youth Policy. It was then Vice President Mahama who launched it. But we all know, the criticism that I had with it. You launch it without an action plan. It really means nothing. It's just a piece of paper that you've written your intentions. You are not committed to anything. So the point is that if he can now, at least let's show that there's an action plan and government is going to tackle at least this issue, even if it is one out of the priority areas.
There's an action plan.
It
was launched with an action plan.
It was not launched with that.
No, you didn't see it, but there was an action plan.
It was not. But I mean...
But you can visit the National Youth Council, the National Youth Authority. There's an action plan.
That has been made public?
Well, you don't need to make
if you keep it secret, then nobody knows what you're up to.
So it's a policy that needs to be public. As for the action plan,
even the
it's like a policy. It's a policy.
It reminds me of,
issue.
and I'm sure Koko will be offended, the CPP launched the manifesto. I have not even seen it. I have not even bothered to read it, because people know they cannot win the election. But I'm excited to wait for the MPP one to read, so that I can also, if I can contribute, or even the NDC one, to also see the way forward. So you see, if you launch something, it's for people to know what it is about. So if people even are not interested, it's for government, through then the Ministry of Information, to make sure that the youth of this country understand that this is a government policy, and it goes beyond the partisan MPP, NDC. You know the problems we've had. The thing has been dragged on But if he can do these things, I
In
think
the
he
area
can
of
prove
governance,
something. Right.
He
But
can
you
prove
see,
something to you.
yes, I think so. It will be again a plus. But you know, there's something very interesting that just crossed my mind. John Mahama was an MP, I think 2 terms or probably more.
3 terms.
3.
3. Nana Akufo-Addo was an MP. So if you are also now, they are the 2 candidates. Let people in NDC-NPP raise this issue because at least they were in a certain position of leadership that is exactly the same. They are competing for one that is now exactly the same. What has John Mahama done to the people of his constituency? What has Nana Akufo-Addo done for the people of his constituency? Those are the things that I think will make our politics, I think, interesting because then we're looking at really not just talking, but what you have done when you were given a certain position. Of course, President Mahama was never an Attorney General or Minister for Foreign Affairs, so you cannot compare him to Akufo-Addo in that thing. And candidate Nana Akufo-Addo was not a Vice President, so you cannot also. But I think, so there are little things that I think can help us as Ghanaians to identify with their styles and so on. Because bottom line, I think, is that as we are moving on, we are now getting to see that, yes, these are the 2 parties that can win elections, but what are they made up of? Their personalities who are leading those parties and also the vision manifesto of those parties. But quickly, the choice of the running mate, I think he made that call as a president. But of course, with consultation with the party. But the irony of it is that it looks like, I don't know, I've heard a rumor that was Prof's choice. I don't know how people threw that rumor out. But so in a sense, it looks like John Mahama seems to want to continue with what Prof stood for and represented.
How could that Prof choose?
No, I mean before that he had
A certain liking for
Mr.
Mr.
Arthur as
Arthur.
yes, as filling that spot at some point going forward.
He knew he was dying?
No, I'm not
No,
saying whether he was. No, I'm not
that
saying whether he
is-
knew he was dying or he was sick or not. I'm saying that he was somebody he thought could. I mean, he was not going to be president forever. Even if he won the 2012 elections, I'm referring to Prof, he would have had to give way for somebody to lead the party. So I'm saying that what I heard was that he was one of the people he had favored to take that sort of a leadership position.
And if John Mahama,
Right.
President Mahama still went ahead
Yeah,
to go
so
for that
I'm getting the
person, it
impression
means
that
what?
John Mahama or President Mahama wants to continue with what Prof represented and stood for. So if I look at things, I think there's very little he's going to do differently from what Prof stood for.
Gordon, what do you think?
Well, 4 months, I mean, pretty short period. But I would want to believe that the government had rolled out a plan, I mean, that would have covered this period. And if the current president is to complete the unexpired term of his former boss, and if that unexpired term would have to carry out certain roll-out programs, then really, I mean, we should not be expecting any policy shift, because he himself has said it, I mean, not once, that there's not going to be any change in terms of policies, change in terms of programs. So that is taken as the case now. However, the approach may differ without essentially affecting the substance. So the question then is, how will that approach be put into action so as, to some extent, to energize the energies of some of those who had, I mean, become disgruntled because of, I mean, 1 or 2 ways in which Prof would have gone about things. Already, I mean, you could see that there are some individuals who previously criticized the way the late president went about things, appear to be coming back and then, I mean, support of certain moves that the current president has taken. I can't immediately mention names, but I know one gentleman who, in a way, defended the choice of the president, the current vice president. I mean, when another senior member made a comment, apparently suggesting that he could not have been used for the upcoming election. So these are the things that we should be looking out for. I mean, how is he going to move across and then reach out to those individuals within the party who, in a way, I mean, became aloof when the Prof was alive? And then talking about moving to the, I mean, flag Staff House. Two things. What really is the reason? During his lifetime, the late president cited security concerns as a reason. Do we have any reason to disbelieve that? Or, we are suggesting that if we have to believe that the security concern was a factor, then is it of such a nature that our security apparatus could not have handled and still have not been able to do? These are issues that we have to deal with. But to suggest that because, you disagreed with the manner in which that edifice was put up, and therefore you will not go in, I think that cannot qualify to be a good reason. At any particular point in time, you have leadership in place. The leadership decides and takes a decision, and all of us must, in a disciplined manner, follow it up. It wouldn't speak well of us in terms of governance for us to keep saying that because a previous leadership took a decision which we would not have taken, and therefore we will not back that particular position. I think that would not be very good for us. So the security apparatus must inform us. They don't need to tell us the details. If a statement comes from them to the effect that the place is not in such a condition or a state that we will advise our president to go in, we take it as that, and then we move on. So that is what I have to say. But again, just the president must also be very careful in trying to stamp his own mark in a manner that may suggest that he will be seeking to do away with some of the decisions, either in terms of policies or even in terms of appointments that the late president might have made. That can be politically suicidal and costly for him. So he needs to be very careful. The excitement will be there, but he needs to temper that with some caution.
Sorry to interrupt. A quick point about the Flagstaff House. Is it also not traced to the colonial era as the castle is? Because you made a point that, it seems the castle represents the colonial or whatever. So what about the Flagstaff House itself? It also represents...
I think it's an Nkrumah's model, I believe.
No, it was used by the colonial administration.
No, the whole country was used by the colonial.
That's a good one.
I'm talking about where the governor lived, where the slave master once lived, which was a construction by the colonial, the slave master himself, to fortify himself against aggressive Ghanaians who were angry with them.
No, but Honorable, my point is that why did you change the name from Jubilee House Blacktop? Because that also created some controversy.
I'm sure that's a debate we can have some other time. Quickly wrap up.
When Nkrumah was moving into the castle, he did go to the castle first, and he explained before Parliament that it was a psychological operation at that moment to demystify what castle symbolized, because that's where the governor lived. And he wanted the people to know that now the black man had gone to take over the throne. So it was psychological. He said this in Parliament, where I have the speech somewhere here. And then subsequently, Flagstaff House. So initially, the castle reason was to demystify the fact that this was the colonial center of colonial authority. Now the black man has taken over the place. He subsequently, for many reasons, both security and post-colonial reasons, Flagstaff House was more secured for him. And the name Flagstaff House is true, Sekou is right, was there before Nkrumah moved in. That was where the commander...
Indeed, we're told that almost in every place that was colonized, there was a Flagstaff House.
The commander of the West Africa Frontier Force, that was his residence. So that was the military outpost. That's why after the coup, the soldiers moved in there again, and took it over as where the chief of defense staff was. So the name Flagstaff House was not an Nkrumah creation. That's a fact.
We're going to spend these last, 40 minutes or 37 minutes talking about the Vice President, Pakwesi Misartha. Vet him in public. No, don't vet him in public. And then the vetting took place in public after the chairman of the vetting committee and his ranking members had given an outline of why they had decided to do it in public. And then the verdict came in. He was disappointing. He was fantastic. No, the committee disappointed us. Their questions were just flat. At the end of the day, was our democracy the stronger or weaker? Sekou, let me start with you.
Oh, I think much stronger, and I think we're all impressed by what took place. I think in this era of multi-party democracy, I think people who are holding or going to hold public office need to really be exposed to the public. And I think we saw what happened. I think he proved himself that he's capable.
Stronger because we held it in public, or because
yes,
the questions and the answers, made you feel proud?
We held it in public, and I think the questions and the answers were, I think, fair. And he conducted himself very well. I think he proved that he can occupy that position.
I had
with all
criticisms
dignity.
from some who said, a good chunk of the questions had to do with his past tenure at the Bank of Ghana. Didn't have much to do with the office he was going to go into, and that even some of his answers about some of the things that he had, acted upon at the Bank of Ghana didn't instill in people the level of confidence they were looking for. What do you make of that?
Well, I think for a layman like me, I think I don't know much about banking, finance, economics, but I think he impressed me. You could see somebody who was also thinking on his feet. I think also he made sure he used the right language. He was decent, and it's not easy to answer questions when the spotlight is on you in the public. But again, that tests also the character of the person. I think the question that really could have disorganized him completely was the one on the allegations of sex, or him having a relationship with a gay. And I think it's good it was asked, and I think, again, he answered it properly. I think it can now be put behind. That is not to say that in Ghana, if somebody is gay, it means he does not qualify to hold public office. I don't know the answer to that. But I know a lot of us kind of don't want to touch anything with homosexuality and so on, and anybody like that. So obviously, I'm sure if he was, let's say, to admit that he was gay, I'm sure he would not have been given the nod to become vice president. So the thing is that I think it went down very well. And I think the choice of a running vice president, I'm sure to be running mate too, somebody who is an economist, finance, that background, banking, I think it's very good, because as a vice president, you are the head of the economic management team. And somehow you fit that position. And I think it also tells me that the direction now for political parties, especially the dominant ones, is that they are going for technocrats. He proves that he's a politician too. He was with the PNDC, was with the NDC, under the leadership of Rawlings as a deputy finance minister. I think he paid his dues to the PNDC, NDC. He's not a young man, but I think that is the best I think they could come up with. But I think it's good for democracy, it's good for NDC, it's good for Ghana. And the competition will be very healthy too. You see, going forward to the election, NDC and MPP, I think both are now really putting people, Nana Addo seems more of a politician. John Mahama is gradually, with the leadership of NDC now, going to occupy the role. But you need then somebody, a technocrat, to complement you. And again, the names that came up, you saw it zeroed down to Kwesi Bochwe, to Guzitano, and then Arthur. And I think Kwesi Bochwe belongs to the old face of NDC, and I think that's not very attractive. And of course, a bit much older. Guzitano left NDC, came back. There's a question of loyalty. I think that is where Imita also stands taller than Guzitano. And again, Guzi will be seen more, again, another politician. And again, you see, a vice, you have to choose somebody who is not, or does not seem to be very ambitious. Otherwise, then it will be friction with him and the president. And a clear case was Rawlings and Vice President Akar between 92 and 1996. It came down to blows, and an embarrassment to everybody. And you had a situation where
blows. He just tapped him on the shoulder.
And then a situation where you had the sitting vice president is running on the ticket of the opposition. That was really obscene. But the thing is that, why did that happen? Because here was somebody who, he was brought in, he was then the choice of the NCP, partner to the NDC. in the Progressive Alliance. But they always had some ambitions, you know, the Nkrumahs. I remember we used to refer to them as the Nkata, but that's the NCP. But the Nkrumahs, you know, they always had that agenda of getting into the NDC and taking over the NDC. And I think Aka somehow did not articulate or represent that agenda very well. I think he shot himself in the foot somehow. President Mills, you could see that it seems to be the same agenda, but it had been done very discreetly and very, of course, in a sense, it also created some problems between the founder and President Mills. And I think that really is the cause of, a lot of us want to pretend it's not, but there are forces that want to more or less change what NDC represents, the revolutionary past and so on, in the name of now we're more conservative and not radical and all that. But the point is that you cannot take Rawlings out of the equation talking about NDC. I mean, the party was formed around him. And you can, if you want to merge CPP or Nkrumahs and NDC, then you also cannot make it an Nkrumahs. You have to have a place for Rawlings and his legacy. Then that merger can successfully.
And looking at all of these considerations, it makes Mr. Arthur an apt choice.
Well, in this case, I'm not too sure. I don't know. I'm not aware whether he's an Nkrumah or not. But John Mahama is.
I'm saying, looking at balancing ambition with competence.
Yes, he's definitely will see like even John Mahama. That's why he was a perfect vice president. Professor Mills, as vice president, was a perfect because they were not people who you could see had those ambitions. Even if they had it, they were suppressed. They didn't come.
You seem to think that he will therefore be a good vice presidential candidate.
I think it will be a great choice, ticket for the NDC. And I think better, contrary to what Kweku said earlier, I think the John Mahama, Mr. Arthur ticket is stronger than the Professor Mills.
How so?
John
Explain
Mahama.
that to me. How so?
Well, I mean, I said earlier that candidate Mahama is now has the energy to go around and be seen one-on-one with people and all that, the door-to-door, whatever you want to call it. So obviously, President Mills could not have done that, and we know the reasons. Again, they are seen as a younger generation, and I think that's more attractive in terms of age.
Mr. Arthur isn't the young one.
Well, that is the point, but John Mahama is the president. He's the one that really selling the ticket.
He's young, he's 60 years.
One. Yeah, 60. Well, I mean, borderline.
Of young.
Retiring age. But the point is that I think he's not at least seen as the old face of NDC. So, although he had been around for a long time, part of the system and all that, I think it's a good choice. I mean, there could have been other good choices too, but I think you just have to make one choice. And I think it's a great one for the NDC.
Godwin.
Yeah, I mean, nationally, you look at it again, this was the first time in our history that we have to go through that kind of a process. And then there was no precedent as to how such an event should be carried out. The speed with which we rolled out the procedure, of course, initially, I mean, there were disagreements as to whether it should be done publicly or it should be done in a camera. These are things that should necessarily happen when you are crafting a process for the first time. And the most important thing is not the existence of the disagreement, but the management of the disagreement. And I would want to say that we managed it very well. And now we have in place a precedent which may only be departed from in very exceptional circumstances. Now the question then will be, this kind of precedent, how important has it been? How does it contribute to the advancement of our democracy? Now we need to understand that transparency and openness, I mean, are key concepts to any democratic process, except in very critical situations where, I mean, opening up a process or a system can undermine the entire system. Everybody will want to see what is happening inside there. And I really did not initially see what the fear was in having the vetting done publicly. I really didn't see why that should have been an issue. In any case, when it was done in public, it was business as usual. Talking about the questions and then all of that, of course, I mean...
Were you impressed or were you disappointed?
Well, I would say that it was okay for me because what were you going to ask him about?
What do you think he should have been asked about?
I mean, you want to find out whether he can occupy the position of a vice president.
And you think the questions they asked him reflected that intent?
They asked him questions about what he has done, and in fact, some other questions that did not relate to what he has done. And those questions are important because the public will throw mud at you. So we want to find out how you react to certain things that may be irritating, maybe untrue, and yet you will have to deal with them. So, I mean, we really were not setting an exam for him to write. We're just taking him through basic things that you expect a leader to do. And, I mean, he met the constitutionally specified criteria. I mean, he's gone through the mail. So, generally speaking, there was really no basis for any critical questions. But, of course, there were problems relating to governance, corruption, and then all those things. How would you have asked him about those things? How he will deal with them? He's coming to support the president. So, I mean, are you going to ask him whether he agrees with what the president will be dealing with? You don't expect him to say those things in public. But it's important that
you don't think it's important to know the person's philosophies or mindset on themes such as that? For instance, he was asked a question about how he would assist the president deal with unemployment. And he mentioned, you know, I think his key answer being that he thinks it should be made a central issue in governance. That didn't necessarily go into detail of the House. Yeah. You are thinking, or are you suggesting that because his job as vice president is just to support the president, that's enough? Or you think it will be, you know, important that at least to hear his thinking through that structure of that problem?
For a person like him, in the particular circumstance that he found himself, I mean, he was not a person who was coming to craft a policy with the president. I mean, the policy has already been crafted. I mean, it is an unexpired term of an existing government. You are coming to assist the existing government complete its term. So really, you can't ask him for original ideas in those particular areas. That answer he gave, that employment should be made central, is the best answer that could be given in that particular context. I mean, if you want to talk about the how, those are the details that you will expect him to do when he takes the job. But of course, that is not to say that, I mean, those were the best questions that could have been asked. With time, we could always improve upon those things. But looking at it, I think that opening up the process was very important, both for himself as an individual to market himself, and then and then also for the country in terms of its democratic advancement. Now, if you want to ask, so how useful will he be as a running mate? I mean, what do you look out for in a running mate? A person who is supportive, a person who has the general knowledge to perform the functions of a president. It may be something that we might have thought of, but never thought that it could happen as it has happened. That you wake up one morning and there is no president, either because he's involved in an accident or something. Can the person immediately step into the shoes of that president and get going without any crisis? You will agree with me that at no point in time did the country experience any power vacuum. At no point in time did the country experience any uncertainty as to the abilities of the incoming president to carry out the thing. It means that the person was prepared. I mean, the person was capable to immediately step into the shoes. Every vice president should command at least that kind of confidence. If you have a vice president that doesn't have the kind of confidence that he had, there will be moments when the whole society will spontaneously be uncertain. Can this person really? And everybody is waiting to see what he can, but we didn't have that. So I think that the new vice president fits into that field, and that should inform subsequent selection of a vice president, not just somebody who will come to support you.
Mr. Popo, are you, as parliamentarians, patting yourselves on the back and saying, yes, we did a good job, or you're already introspecting to see how, if you are ever called upon to do this job again, maybe you could do it better?
Well, thank you very much. I think that we have made history. It is the first time it has happened. It is the first time Parliament is called upon to, or was called upon to chart a course and leave a precedent for a future generation. Under the leadership of Right Honorable Do Ajahu, the first Deputy Speaker, and me being the Vice Chairman, we're confronted with an issue on how to chart this course. And we are proud we are part of history in this process. many were those who were very skeptical and blame us for what happens. They complained that we are exposing the incoming vice president to dangers of destruction because he would be put in harm's way with people asking him all kinds of questions. Thankfully, we had this vice president who stood tall and was on top of issues, was capable and distinguished himself to the rest of the country. But in the end, those who supported us when we talked about when the combination of the minority and majority in the committee agreed that we were going to go public about it, those who supported us also said they were disappointed because they thought that we should have asked tougher questions. I don't know how much tough you would want these questions to be. You know, the answers provided by the nominee at the time proved that he knew what he was about. He made simple, difficult answers. And so people thought they were easy to answer. Put them there and let them answer the same questions. And you will find that they were really, really very tough questions. But what questions were we to ask him? We were to vet him to prove that, one, in accordance with the Constitution of Ghana, he's a Ghanaian by birth, he's more than 40 years, he has cleared his taxes, and he has he's a registered voter. And these were things, after this basic understanding, basic things, you don't need to ask any further question if you can prove that these things were true by the Constitution. But we went ahead to question him about his job. How much did he apply himself to his job? Whether he knew what his job as a governor of Ghana, you know, the impact of his job on the Ghanaian economy. How come the cedi is fallen? How come we can have a situation of growth happening and people were still saying they needed money and, you know, and he tackled the issues very, very strongly and fairly. And in the end, because of the easy way he took them, people thought they were easy questions. They were not, indeed. So for me, I think that it was a great thing done. It was, we hailed by the international community. Ghana once again has shown that we can do it. We did not hoard into the system a vice president. We exposed him to the public. We asked questions on behalf of the public. We made it possible for him to distinguish himself, and he did. And it has shown that we have confidence in him. I'm happy. This is a skeptical voice like Sekou Nkrumah can say that he did well. And that shows. I know he's not a fan of anybody. He's not anybody who just try to kowtow to people and bootlick people. He's not that kind of person. So when he says it was a good performance and that it was a very strong combination between him and His Excellency John Mahama, I know he was telling the truth. So I know that this man will bring a lot in Ghana's march to improve our economy, because he's a well-known gentleman who is well-grounded in the economy, who has done a lot of work in the economy, who did so much to draw the Ghana development plan in the NDC era, and who was part of the ERP process by which helped Ghana to get on the right kind of footing as we have now, and build an economy from the base and have it stabilized at this point in time. So he will be a very good combination with His Excellency John Mahama in a future ticket to win power.
Kahu, what do you think?
Well, I've been going, of course I watched it live, but I've also been going through the report that is submitted by your committee.
Yes.
You've intercepted that one too?
But this is a public record, isn't it? 26th report of the Appointments Committee. It's a public record.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I'm doing nothing illegal.
No. It's not illegal.
Against the standing orders of Parliament.
Parliament could call you for contempt too.
No. This is public documents.
And I happened to, but I watched it live. It was good. I think the week before, a day or so before, we indicated that in terms of his professionalism,
couple of days ahead of
competence.
But you had mentioned that you were hoping some questions wouldn't come up.
Yes, but it was asked in a very disciplined way, very decent way. So I was okay. I was talking about a question relative to the sexuality. In the media, there are media houses that had put it out in a certain way, thinking they were defending the nominee. But in a way, they were going about it, in my candid opinion, a very, I don't know, crude way. And it was rather fueling a certain negative perception about the gentleman. You know, they may not have meant to do that, but that was the outcome, the effect of what they were doing. So I was a bit worried. I've known him for some time. I think he's a fine gentleman, no doubt about that. Except that Sekou disagrees with me in terms of the assessment of the ticket. I made that point based on his relative electoral obscurity. He doesn't have much electoral visibility. That is, if he's going to be running mate. He's a long-standing political cat, quote unquote. He's been in there for a long time. His record shows it. But that even tells you the story, the lack of visibility relative to campaign platforms, election political platforms. And I was saying that Mills, Mahama, both had that sufficient visibility, which Mahama Emisata lacks. The visibility is more with the leader, the face on the ticket. So it appears he's going to have to carry more of the campaign stuff than the previous one, when they almost shared it, you know. So that's the point I was making, that in terms of relativity, I see it as a weaker ticket. I'm not talking about their qualities in terms of their professionalism and their management skills and things. That's not what I'm looking at all. But of course, this thing suffered, and it's not because the committee wanted it so. It is the extraordinary circumstances that informed this whole vetting. The notice to the public to bring memo. They didn't receive any petition.
You didn't?
No.
First of all, there was limited time.
5 days.
Yes, so it was difficult for people to have brought any such petitions. Then holding it in camera was also had become an issue. But if you realize that the chairman indicated that if there were questions bordering on some sensitive thing to do with our central bank, they could go into camera. He said so, if
yes,
I'm right.
Yes.
But those questions never came up, so it became all public. I've been going through one of his answers, is the Woyome question. I'm sure it was Attach here who asked the question. And I've gone back to read the Yoko report, and I've saw something quite significant, so, but we need to interrogate it further. On page 11 of the Yoko report, after making some points, and I'm quoting, it says, at this stage, we are not told exactly at which stage by Yoko, the Honorable Minister of Finance ordered payment, and the process for payment was initiated. However, when the instruction to pay got to the Bank of Ghana, and before Bank of Ghana could effect payment, His Excellency the President had intervened and ordered the Honorable Minister of Finance not to effect payment. In accordance with the President's instruction, the Minister of Finance in turn issued instructions and the payment was stopped. It's quite interesting. Until reading this carefully, the impression I got from the question that was posed was as if the instructions not to pay went directed to the BOG from the presidency. But if you read this, it appears it went to the Minister of Finance not to pay. Of course, Yoko didn't tell us how even the presidential directives were issued and when. It's still a significant answer that then one can conclude that perhaps the Minister of Finance or the Minister of Finance did not redirect the presidential directive, if you allow me to say so, either to the Controller and Accountant General, which I believe might have been the appropriate place for them then to stop whatever advice they had sent to Bank of Ghana. I hope you get the way it works. Yeah. So the governor may be technically right in saying that he didn't receive any instructions from the presidency not to pay. Technically, he may be right in answering the question the way it was posed. But it doesn't take away the fact that at the end of the day, that presidential directive not to pay turned out to be very weightless and valueless, in the sense that the hard fact is that payment was effected. That comes back to the question we are raising in terms of governance, the content of governance. You may be good, you may be honest, you may be sincere, but effectiveness is important. It's said that sincerity and honesty, they are no substitutes for science in politics. And I think we should be clear about that. Then also, the answer to the unlicensed banking things. I had a little problem with it, and it's not a question of personalization, because it's not the individual we are talking about here, but whether the central bank does not have the capacity to monitor, to evaluate, an intelligence capacity to dictate why a company could operate for almost 2 years, I'm told, without detection. There must be something then we should do to re-engineer the central bank's capacity. So for me, that was the answer. It's not him, the person I'm questioning, in terms of his ability, no. Systems. But it appears systemically there's something we ought to do to ensure that detection period can be shorter than, because crime is crime. You can commit crime. We have police, but crime goes on. But we must have the ability to detect as quickly as possible so that we can deal with the matter. Then I wasn't convinced about that dollar withdrawal situation, over the counter thing, the instructions that the central bank is supposed to have issued, and whether indeed the banks are going according to the guidelines. Again, question of monetary and evaluation may come in, because there are all sorts of problems. I've had problems. Okay, and I started thinking of perhaps I must keep my dollars under my bed. I'm giving all sorts of explanations that, oh, if it's through a check or if it was from the offshore, that's where it's subjected to that particular requirement that you cannot take more than a certain amount. But I know somebody who wanted to take $2,000 and there was a problem over the counter. But I heard the governor talking of $10,000. So there's something wrong. It's true we are not a dollar economy, but we use dollar to buy everything. I'm told that some government contracts and businesses are denominated in dollars. So what kind of life are we living? We should be very realistic about that. I think there's a problem with that policy. I am not sure. You see, for me, it reflects a certain panic, or it reflects that all the noise about economic progress may not be sustainable. This, if your CD, your currency is suffering, it tells a story, very loud story about the state of the economy. And the way and manner we are going about tackling the CD depreciation and withdrawal of foreign exchange, especially dollar in the banks, is telling me that indeed deep down somewhere, the economy is in serious trouble and we are not about to admit it publicly. And that's not fair enough. So that I have a problem with that answer too. In the sense that I'm not here looking at the person, I'm looking at what it brought up to tell us the things that perhaps we should be dealing with. I was also not happy. There was an attempt not to make him answer questions relative to security. Why? Vice President possibly will be chairman of the Armed Forces Council and the Police Council. He may not have earlier prior security experience, but he's going to be vice president. And the president may decide that you are going to chair these two bodies. Now, it's not a cast in iron in terms of our constitutional amendments that we did in 1996. But President Mahama, then Vice President Mahama, chaired. I believe he would ask his vice to chair the two. So he ought to have been examined. Those questions on security ought to have been allowed full range so that we will have an idea what he thinks. He's been in politics for long, so we would believe that he should have some ideas. Access declaration, we were told is a brief for another body. Well, maybe, but if petitions had come from the public, he may have been asked questions on it, because that I've seen other nominees, especially ministerial nominees, Edumazi and the rest, they had problems with their assets. Because I think petitions had come, memos had come. So maybe there I would understand what the chairman was doing. He could have been asked, okay, have you declared your assets? Because as governor, he had to declare his assets in line with the constitution or the assets declaration regime. And then maybe some questions will flow there. So I'm not too bothered about that aspect. Otherwise, his vetting was good for transparency and accountability in terms of those principles. And Parliament also showed the appropriate unanimity, you know, the word about dissent, discipline. I believe we said so here, that the committee will rise above all these fears that people were expressing and do justice to it. Finally, he also demystified one propaganda that was all over the place in terms, which he himself had sown the seeds for initially, that every election year there is some serious depreciation relative to the cedi. But on that platform, a very serious platform, he did a certain slight correction by indicating that 2004 was depreciation, but was very marginal. It sets the record straight. In terms of the propaganda out there, there was so much debate. Oh, it was 244%, was this. Those of us who are economic illiterates were all talking some. Okay? But at that platform, he did justice to the matter. So I think it was a very useful exercise. And we have a good vice president, at least from now to the term. He's professionally competent, clear in my mind.
We've just got about some 3 minutes. I don't know if any of our guests have some very final comments.
Yeah,
to
there's
make.
something I think that we missed earlier when you said what we expect President Mahama to do. I think the refusal of President Mills to do the IEA program was actually smacked of political arrogance. And I hope President Mahama can now accept to.
But you know, the party gave an explanation.
It wasn't good. It wasn't
turn
good.
away from it now?
Why not? If he's president, he should.
Mr. Fofo?
Because I think we'd love to see him.
That's an interesting point.
It's a decision
just
by...
in
Very
my
interesting
mind,
point.
It is the decision by the president himself, whether he wants to come or not.
Right.
President Mills said he didn't want to come.
Right.
I mean, if President John Mahama thinks he should go, he should go. And I don't think it was anything close to ignorance can be attributed to the decision by the
No, I
president.
said arrogance.
Arrogance can be attributed to the former president. In fact, that's unfair, and I'll require you to withdraw it.
No, I said political arrogance.
Political arrogance, it smacks of it, is unacceptable. The reason being that he has a right to say he will go or not. IEA is not any machinery, legal machinery that compels a person to appear
but all
before
the
it.
other
But you
candidates
know
are
that
doing
is
it.
an easier thing to do than moving into the Flagstaff house as I was.
Yes, in both cases, he has a choice to make.
Yes, but
if he
I
has
think-
made that choice,
Right.
that description
But I
is
think
not
if he wants to
acceptable
distinguish
at
himself
all.
or separate himself
Very interesting point. I
from
hadn't
the
thought of
Mills,
that.
I think that would be one
I
easy
hadn't
point.
thought of that.
or
I think
easy-
I'll be honest. It's a very good point.
His Excellency can decide to attend it.
Wouldn't
Very
it make your party come across as, being double-minded?
He's the party leader now.
No, yeah, he's the leader of the party. And I'm saying that the choice to go or not to go rests solely with him. And let me correct one thing. When I said that Flagstaff House was a creation of Nkrumah, I mean Flagstaff House as a residence of the president was a creation of the first president.
I agree. It symbolized the presidential authority in the First Republic. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
It's the name that we were suggesting was a colonial creation, a legacy of colonial.
Yeah, the naming. Yeah. And the Vice President, Mr. Atta, His Excellency Mr. Atta, is, of course, a very, very appropriate person. But the answers he said he gave also were answers that he couldn't have done anything about. I mean, especially on the, I don't want to go deeper into because we don't have much time, on the Bank of Ghana issue about the
You couldn't have said any more than he said.
Yeah, he couldn't have.
I'll wrap up with final comments from some of our listeners and our viewers. Benjamin Bonti says the ceremony wasn't bad, but accountability is what we must seek for beyond everything. Ghanaian deserves better. Ni Ubruni Shikache from Mamprobi says, I want to thank Sekou for his observation of J.J. Rawlings at the graveside. At least I thought he should have been given an opportunity to lay a wreath for being the one who discovered the late President Mills. David Kingsley says President Mills was not an angel. He had a good human attribute, but that did not automatically make him a good leader. Probably, if the NDC had told the truth about his health, people would have factored that into their criticism of him. As we wrap up, here are my thoughts. You know, in the midst of my tears yesterday, as I watched the final funeral rites, I was proudly Ghanaian. The funeral planning committee did a yeoman's job and deserves our applause. The military was brilliant. Ghanaians showed our humanity. We have handled the events of the last 2.5 weeks with a lot of maturity, even in the midst of our difficulties. Congratulations to us. There will be questions about cost. There will be questions about postmortems. They will come, but I trust that we'll handle them with the same level of maturity. Most people agree that President Mills was a fine gentleman. Some disagree that those attributes were unable to translate into great leadership. Wherever you stand on that argument, let's be mindful of sweeping praise and sweeping criticism. Sometimes it becomes the fodder for unnecessary political vilification. And finally, President Mahama and his new vice president can now look forward to finishing the unexpired term of President Mills. I'm sure that we'll wish them all the best, as we'll wish all the other political parties all the best as we get into political season one more time. Thank you for listening and for watching. This is Newsfile.